What's up, guys? TJ Grant here with Quad Poly, and today we're going to recreate the Dune title sequence in Fusion. Let's get started. Down in the description below, you're going to see a link to the font file. Go ahead and download that, install that into your system, and let's load up Resolve and get started. So inside of Resolve, let's go ahead and make our Fusion comp. So right click, go to New Fusion Composition. We're going to set the duration to 10 seconds. And I'm just going to call this Dune title. And we'll keep the frame rate at 24, hit create. And then let's take that and drag it into our timeline. And then let's go into the Fusion tab. Inside the Fusion tab here, let's go ahead and we're going to use the Text 3D node. So just click and drag it onto your node graph here. And we're going to set up the rest of our 3D scene. So we're going to need to get a Merge 3D node. So right click, go to Add Tool, 3D, and then Merge 3D. And then the rest of the nodes that we're going to use are all coming from this 3D menu here. So we're going to get a point light, and then we're going to copy that, and then we'll paste it. And then we're also going to grab a camera 3D node. And finally, we're going to need a renderer 3D node. Now let's go ahead and link all these together. So from the Merge 3D, let's go from the output here and put it into the Render 3D. And I'm just going to move this out of the way to give us room. And then the rest of these we're just going to attach inside of the Merge 3D node. Now click on the Merge 3D node and let's go ahead and show it into the first viewport here so we can see what we're working on. And then click on the Render 3D node and hit 2 on the keyboard so that we can see it in the second viewport here. Alright, with that done, let's start working on our text. Inside our Text 3D node, let's go ahead and we're going to write the letter D, and we'll change the font to the Neo Club Music, and the style we're going to use light. Okay, now inside of here you'll notice that the text is bright white, and that's because our lighting isn't on. So inside of this viewport, if you right click, go to 3D options, make sure lighting is turned on. Now it will appear very dark, but that's okay because we're going to be moving our point lights around in order to shade it better. So go ahead and click on a point light, and we're going to move this one up, and we'll bring it out a little bit further. And then on the second point light, let's move it down, and we'll also move that slightly back. Okay? Now back into our Text 3D node, let's go ahead and give it an extrusion. So under the pull down menu here, let's go ahead and give it some depth. Alright, go maybe about 0.02. And then we're going to increase the bevel depth and the bevel width. Alright, so it's going to give us that nice chamfered edge there. Alright. Now for the lights, let's go ahead and move them around because we want to have some shading on the front here. So let's go ahead and move this forward a little bit more. And then we'll move this one a little bit better there. Okay, now that we have our text, let's frame it inside of our Render 3D node so that we can actually see what it's going to look like on the screen. So let's click on the Camera 3D node here so we can make sure that we move it. And on the Z-axis, let's just pull it back. And we'll just keep pulling it back until we want the size of the D to be roughly the size that we want on the screen here. So then we'll move it up on the Y-axis to kind of center it. And now inside of our Render 3D node, make sure we enable the lighting. And I'm going to change the renderer type to OpenGL. So the next thing I'm going to do is replace the material on the text. So I'm going to move this out of the way. And then I'm going to add 2 nodes. And so under the 3D menu again, we're going to do Replace Material 3D. And clicking and dragging it with the Shift key held down, I'm going to move it and hover it over the line here, and that's going to automatically connect that. And then the other node I'm going to add is under the 3D menu again, only this time it's material, and we're going to go to Cook Torrents. And from the output of the Cook Torrents, we're going to place it into the Replace 3D node there. All right. So in the Cook Torrents node, we're going to change a couple of color settings here. So let's change the red to 0.827, green to 0.551, and blue to 0.307. That's going to give us a slight golden color. And then under specular, we're going to reduce the roughness down to 0 or 0.1. And then the refractive index, we'll just move that down to 1.394. All right. And then under transmittance, we're going to change the color of that to 0.551. The green to 0.465, and the blue to 0.063. All right, so that's going to give us a nice golden color. So now that we have our initial text set up, I'm going to copy these nodes 3 times because I want more control over the letters individually when I go to animate them. So I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. So there's 1, 2, and 3. All right. So now I'm going to merge them all. So if you go from the output of the Replace 3D, we're going to put that into the Merge 3D node, put that into the Merge 3D node, and then we're going to place that into the Merge 3D node. Now, let's clean this up at least a little bit. So if you hold down Alt and you're on the line here, you can create an elbow. So let's just go ahead and create an elbow there, an elbow here, and an elbow here. And that's just to help kind of clean it up. All right, so click on the second text 3D there and just change the text to a U, and then this text to an N. And then the last one, we're going to keep it as a D, simply because if we make an E, we're going to get that line across there in our font, and we don't want that because we use the solar eclipse in order to create that line in the E. So we're just going to keep it as a D, but if you go up to the transform and you go to rotation, under the Y-axis, just rotate that to 180 degrees. All right. So with that text set up, let's go ahead and move these into position here. So we're going to move the D over to here, and then we'll manually move the U and the N, and then finally the E. All right. May need to give it a little bit more spacing. So, and I pretty much just eyeballed it. Okay. Now with that set up, we can start working on the rest of the text here, which is to get the solar eclipse inside of here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, before we do the eclipse, I want to add in a little extra highlight to the edges of the text here. So the way that we're going to do it is actually pretty simple. First thing we're going to do is go to Add Tool, we'll go to Color, and then we're going to grab a color corrector. And let's go ahead and hit 2 on the, or 1 on the keyboard so we can see what we're working with here. So in the color corrector node, I'm going to change the saturation to 0.7, and then the gain I'm going to do 1.32. Okay, that makes it a little bit brighter, but now I want to add in a little bit of metalness to it. Okay, so I'm going to add in a glow node. So if I go down to resolve FX light, I can go to glow here, okay? And I'm going to connect that to the node. I'm going to hit 2 on the keyboard so we can see what it's doing. And under the glow node, I'm going to add or change the output to shiny regions, okay? And the threshold is going to be 0.378, all right? Now, that really darkened it, but it did help with some of the metalness that I was looking for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to combine these two together, the color corrected part and then just the glow part. And the way I'm going to do that is with the merge node. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to place this on top and this in the background, okay? This on the top here, all right? And then I'm going to hit 2 on the keyboard. And under this merge node, I'm going to change the apply mode to soft light. And then I'm going to reduce the gain down to 0.89. All right. And then the blend is going to be 575. All right. And you can see at this point, it really kind of helps pop the outer edge there and helps the overall kind of metal look to the whole thing. All right. So let's actually create the Eclipse part now. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to add in a background node. And in this background node, we're going to go over to image and we're going to uncheck auto resolution. And the main reason why I do that is because when I come over here and I change this to 2048 by 2048, if I had that checked, it wouldn't let me do that. Okay. And you'll notice throughout this tutorial, I'm going to change that value quite a bit just to make it square for good reason, because I want it bigger than the actual final output, and because we're going to be scaling things up and down later on when we go to do the animation, I want to be able to have enough room in order to do that. All right, so in this background node, we're going to add a couple things. I want to go into the color now of that background node, and I'm going to change the color. All right, and this is us making that blue, that initial blue color. So change the red to 0.425, the green to 0.496, and the blue to 0.638. Okay, and now we're going to add an ellipse mask. So if we go to Add Tool, go to Mask, and we go to Ellipse. All right, and I'm going to put this and plug it into the blue arrow. All right, so for most of these nodes, that blue arrow is going to indicate a mask. Okay, and so you can see the ellipse masked out most of that background. Okay, so under that ellipse node here, I'm going to change the size of that to 0.006 by 0.006. That's pretty small. All right, and then we need to actually place this in the center of the E, so we're going to add another merge node. Okay, now I'm going to keep the text on top. Okay, so I'm going to plug that into the green arrow, and then this background node is going to go into the yellow arrow. All right, and then let's hit 2 on the keyboard. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this ellipse, make sure that's selected. I'm going to just zoom in, and now I can just take it and drag it over into the center of that E. All right. Now, let's add a glow node. And so if we go to right click, Add Tool, go to Blur, and we'll go to Glow. All right, and we're going to hold down Shift and connect that in there. We'll hit 1 on the keyboard so we can see what we're doing. And for this, I'm going to change the glow size to 2.6, the glow value to 0.992, and the blend is going to be 0.15. All right. And then just to kind of give it some variance there, I'm going to add in a vector distortion. So if I hold down Control and hit Spacebar, it's going to bring up a search menu here, and I'll just type in vector distortion. All right, I'm going to choose this top one here, and I'm going to double click, or I'm going to hold down Shift and put that in there, and then I'm going to change the scale of it to 0.27. All right, and then the center bias is going to be negative 0.92. All right, and the glow is going to be at 1. All right, and you can see it kind of gives me a little bit of stuff that's not uniform in there. All right, now we're going to make the outer flare. All right, and so we're going to start off with a directional blur. So we go to Blur, Directional Blur, and we're going to tie that into there as well. Let's hit 1 on the keyboard so we can see what we're doing here. Let's hit 2 on there, actually. Keep that under the merge node, okay? And so the directional blur, we're going to change the type to centered. And then the length is going to be 0.2. And the glow is going to be 0.535. All right. And then finally, we're going to add in a soft glow. So if we go to Add Tool, go to Blur, this time we're going to have a soft glow. We're going to plug that right into there. All right, and it kind of looks like a lightsaber now. But we're going to change the gain to 5.0 and the glow size to 7.9, and the blend is going to be 0.165. Okay, very small. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to copy this ellipse node and we're going to paste it. And under the directional blur, we're going to place that right there. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the width of it now. All right. And then let's move it up a little bit so we can get a little more of that glow at the top there. Okay. And we'll make the height, or at least the width of this, at 0.205. And then the height of it is going to be 0.002. Okay, very thin. All right, but what we're going to do though is change that border width now to 0.0014. Okay, and so you can see that now it looks like a really nice long solar flare. All right, and then the last thing that we need to do is we need to make that actual planet, or at least the dark spot or the planet in front of that flare there. So it's pretty easy to do. We're going to take the background in the ellipse node there, we're going to copy it and paste it, and then we're going to take that merge tool again, and this time we're going to plug this into the background here, and then this background we're going to place on top. All right, and then let's take a look at that. Okay, and the background itself, we're going to change that back to black here. All right, and then we're going to take that ellipse node and we're going to increase the size of that. And place that right over the top. All right, and I'm going to scale it down just a little bit. So now that our main text is done, let's go ahead and create the dust that exists behind the letters. So the way that we're going to do that is actually pretty simple. What we're going to do is over here with all of these 3D objects, including the Merge 3D and the point lights, what we're going to do is just copy all of these nodes here. All right, so just copy and then just scroll down and then paste. All right, and we'll move this out of the way. And we also want to have this camera, and we're going to use the camera in the same Merge 3D scene. So all you have to do is just drag it into the Merge 3D there. So now both the Merge 3Ds will use the same camera. And if we take a look at it, it's exactly the same as the text. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make use of another new node here, and that is the duplicate node. So, and specifically the duplicate 3D node, since we are going to be using it on 3D objects. So if we just go to right click, add tool, go to 3D, and down here you'll have the duplicate 3D node. Alright, and let's hold down shift and drag it into here. Alright, so what we're going to do is, this is actually a really good node because all it does is, as the name implies, it duplicates it. So we can come over here and you'll notice now when I hit X offset, you'll see that it makes a bunch of, it makes a copy, and then I can come up here and add as many copies as I want. I can change it along the different axes, X, Y, and Z, and I can even change the rotation. All right, so it's a really handy node. But for our needs, we're going to change the settings up to copies. We're going to do 4 or 7 of them. And we're going to change the X offset to 0.099, so it's really close to each other. Because when we look at the reference on the original title sequence, it really just looks like that they copied the text itself, the letters, and created that kind of dust behind there. So that's the reason why we're using this duplicate 3D node. So let's go ahead. X offset is 0.099. Y offset will be negative 0.02. And the Z, we're going to hit that, make sure that's back to 0. All right. And we're going to change that rotation now on the X. We're going to do negative 9.566, and the Y will be 2.98. All right. That's essentially how it's going to look. Okay. So let's do the same on the rest of the text. And thankfully, all we have to do is just copy and paste that node, and we'll paste another one, and we'll paste one more. Now holding down shift, we'll just link them all. All right. Now specifically for these other duplicate 3D nodes, I actually changed up the number of copies to 4 and just added some randomness so that they're not exact copies of one another. So you could actually just play with the values if you want a different look, but these are the ones that I use. So X offset is 0.109, Y offset will be 0.086, negative. Actually, it is positive. And then the rotation will be negative 15.651, and the Y-axis, or the Y rotation, is negative 10.36. All right, let's go down to the third duplicate 3D node here, and we'll change those values. Again, copies will be 4, and the X offset will be negative 0.029. The Y will be negative 0.058. And the rotation will be negative 15.7 and negative 10.4. And the last one, I changed the copies again to 4. And the offset was negative 0.176. The y offset is negative 0.057. And the rotation on the x will be negative 15.649. And lastly, the y rotation will be negative 10.366. Okay, so we have those duplicated. Now we need to stylize them. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take the 3D and we need to now render this out to the 2D image here. So from the merge 3D, make sure you grab the square output here and we'll drag it right into the render 3D node. Now let's take a look at what we're working with here. So what we're going to change is we need to turn on the lighting, and let's change this to OpenGL render. So the first node that we're going to use in order to blur and stylize these duplicated texts into that dust or spice is we're going to use a prism blur. So hold down Control and Spacebar, and let's just type in prism and hit add. And we're going to drop this into here. All right, and let's take a look at it, see what it does. And this really gives a great like chromatic aberration kind of effect, but we're going to change it so that the strength isn't nearly as high. So we're going to go and do the blur 0.01, and then the aberration distance is going to be 0.071. And the strength is going to be 0.236. All right. The next one that we're going to add is a mosaic blur. So again, let's go ahead and use that search command, and we're going to do mosaic as it pops up here. All right. Now let's take a look and see what this does. Now this is great, especially if you want a pixelated effect. But for our instance, we're going to use this to add some randomness inside of that blur. So we're going to increase the pixel frequency of this to 226.8. All right, and the smooth strength will be 0.307. All right, and that just adds a little bit of randomness inside of here. Okay. The next node we're going to use is a vari blur. So let's go ahead and pull up our search again. We're going to do vari blur. Click on add. Let's take a look and see what this does. And we're going to change the method of the vari blur to defocus. And we're going to blur the luma channel on this. And we're going to set the blur size to 2.99. And the blur limit to 1. And then I'm going to add in a color corrector node because I want to change the color of it and kind of reduce some of that saturation down. So let's go ahead, and if you search again, we'll do color corrector node. Hit add. And for this one, we're going to change the overall saturation to 0.53. And let's go ahead and hit 2 on the keyboard so we can see what we're doing here. And then the gain will be 1.32. The lift will be 0.06. The gamma will be 0.97. And the brightness will be 0.05. Now we need to actually kind of make it look like it's sandy dust. Okay, so the way that we're going to do that is by using a vortex node. So if we right click, go to add tool, if we go down to resolve warp, resolve FX warp, we can see the vortex node that we're going to use. Let's go ahead and drop that into here, and let's take a look and see what this does. Now, the way that I did this is that I actually used 4 different ones. So we're going to change the size of this to 0.11, so it's very small. And then the angle will be -28, only because we don't want too much distortion happening. The power will be 1.496, And then I'm going to add a swirl of 0.147. All right. Now you can take this and actually just drag it into place, and that's really all that I did there. Now that we have that one done, I'm going to copy and paste it again and make sure that this node is selected here. And I'm going to move this into place, and I'm going to increase the size a little for this one, just so that most of the U gets deformed up there. And then I'm going to copy and paste it again. This time we're going to move it over to the end, although I will reduce the size so it doesn't affect too much of this letter here. And then we're going to paste it one more time over, and we're going to hit 2 again so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to place this over to here. So the next node I'm going to make is in a road and dilate node. So we're going to go into our search. We'll just type in erode and hit add. So the value that we're going to use is negative 0.0036. And if we hit 2 on the keyboard, you'll be able to see the effect that it's had. All right. Now let's go ahead and add in one more node before we merge it in with our text, and that's going to be a filter node. And what this is going to do is going to give us some noise to help kind of make it look a little more like sand or the spice. So add tool, we'll go ahead and do our search, and let's search for the filter node and hit add. And filter type, we're just going to go to noise. Let's go ahead and add on our merge node here, because we're going to merge these two scenes together. So up at the top where our merge node is over here, I'm going to go ahead and move this over just so that it's a little bit more clean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make room down here for our next step. So I'm going to need to take this bottom dust that we've been working on. We're going to place that in the background here. And then we're going to place our top text on the top node. And we'll hit 2 on the keyboard so we can actually see it all come together here. All right. And then for the sake of making it clean, I'm just going to hold down Alt and bring this into a little elbow here. So let's get started on creating our background. So we're going to use a background node, and we're going to go over to image, and we're going to uncheck auto resolution and change this to 2048 by 2048. And then we're going to add in a paint node. And let's hit 1 on the keyboard. And the first thing I'm going to do is select the polyline tool, and I'm just going to click once and click again. And what we're going to do is create those random lines that you see in those title sequence. So after you've created the line, you can come over here and change the size of this, and we're going to do this 0.0031. And then we're going to change the color of the red to, we're going to keep that at 1, and then the green we're going to do 0.998, and then the blue 0.815. That's just going to give it a slight golden color to better match our colors in our sequence here. And then we're also going to change the opacity of this down to 0.008. All right. Now you're going to barely be able to see that. All right. So for the tutorial here, I'm going to go ahead and raise this up just a little bit so that we can actually see our lines on the video. All right. Now I'm also going to make another line. And we'll also make one more line. And all this is it's basically just going to create some randomness. Next, we're going to duplicate these lines. And so we're going to use a duplicate node. Only this time we're going to use the 2D version of it since last time we used the 3D version of it with our text because we were working inside of a 3D scene, this time we have to use the 2D version of it. So we're going to go ahead and just create that node and link that together and come over and hit 2. And we are going to change the number of copies to 17. We're going to change the size of it to 0.98. Just kind of shrink it a little bit. And the angle is going to be 67.8. And then we're going to go to the jitter tab here. And we're going to adjust the X size to 0.16. Now, if you're following along, you're probably wondering, if this is making copies, where are they all at? Well, under this node, we need to adjust the alpha as well. And now you can see that they are all starting to appear. All right. So if we have 0 alpha, then it's going to show all of them. But if we just do a little bit, you can see that it's also going to duplicate and reduce the alpha over the course of the copies as it goes along. So that's a little hint right there. While I like the lines, what I am also going to do is I want some variation in the lines. So the way that we're going to do that, we're going to add in a fast noise node here, and we're going to plug this into the mask channel of the paint. Okay, and let's take a look at our noise here. And what I'm going to do is just change and set the detail to 4.41. And then we're going to change the contrast to 2.02. And then the brightness negative 0.22. And then the scale will just be 3.62. All right, and you can see now when we zoom in, you can see some variation along those lines as it's getting masked out. All right, and then finally, because we are going to have an eclipse back here, I don't want those lines interfering a whole lot with it. I want a very clean circular edge here. Just on these. So what I'm going to do is also add another mask, but I'm going to use that ellipse tool again. So get the ellipse mask, drop it in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click invert, and then I'm going to change the height and the width of that to 0.346. All right, and so now you can see that we have a little bit of a cleaner line throughout this. So now let's make those dotted circles that we see in those title sequence. So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, take another background node. We are going to keep this merge node here. If you're wondering what happened there, I had this node selected, and if I just clicked on background, it created both the merge and the background node for us, which we can keep set up like this. So we'll go ahead and just keep that. But for the background node here, we're going to need to change that to auto resolution. We're going to just keep this at 2048 by 2048. Okay. Only at this time, I'm going to change the alpha down to 0. Okay, and the reason why is because we're going to need to be able to see this underlying layer here. So now that we have this background node though, we're going to again create another paint layer. All right, and this time we're going to draw a line, but we're going to draw it straight across. And if you hold down the shift key and click over here, it will create a very straight line. It will keep that horizontal. And then, like before, we're going to change the size of that to 0.0031 and change the colors again. We're going to keep the red at 1. We're going to change the green to 0.998 and the blue to 0.815. And we also are going to reduce the opacity down. This time I'm going to keep it around 0.15. Okay? Now, we created a straight line, but we need that to be a circle. And just so that we can see this, just for the time being, let's go ahead and just increase the alpha to 1 on this background node here, just so that we can see what happens here. So in order to get this to be a circle, since we really don't have a circle tool that works the way that we want to animate it with later on, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a coordinate space node. Coordinate space. You're going to hit add. And what this is going to do is take a look at this. Under the coordinate space node, let's go ahead and change that from polar to rectangular. And you'll see that it actually took this straight line and wrapped it around in a circle. So now if we go back to our Paint 2 node, what we're going to need to do is go ahead and select your line, click and drag over the top of that, and then under your stroke controls, we're going to give it some spacing. And what this is going to do is give us that the dots in between. And I think I made that about 1.5. All right. And we are also under the right on, we're going to also change the beginning and the start of the line. So this is how you can do those tracings and those growing lines inside of Fusion here is just with this right on option here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set it about halfway on each side here. And then, just like before, we have multiple lines, but in this case, I'm going to use a duplicate node again. So we'll just hit Control Space, bring up the search, type in duplicate, hit add. We're going to make the number of copies to, we'll do 3. And then the size will be 0.94. And we'll make sure that the gain is set to 0 on this one, so we can actually see all of our lines this time. And then we also want to change the angle, so we're going to kind of eyeball it, but I kind of like this design here where they're just offset. Okay? And then what we need to do, since we want to see our random lines and these circles here, we're going to need to change our alpha back to 0. So now you can see our lines, our circles are coming through. But one thing that I want to do though, and this is important, is that these circles need to come out further from the lines. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to actually select this point over here. Make sure that my arrow with the plus sign is here. That will allow me to select these points. And then if you click this tab here, it'll select all the points on that line. And then just holding down Shift, if I start to move this up, you should see on the right hand side of this screen that this is going to increase the diameter of that circle. So I'm going to keep it relatively right here for right now. We may have to adjust it a little bit later, but for right now we'll just keep it right around that point. So now we need to create those solid circular lines. And we're just going to go ahead and take the nodes that we made with the dotted lines. We're just going to copy and paste them. And let's go ahead and connect these two merges up together. This merge node, I'm just going to show it in this viewport here. And this paint node, I'm going to come over here and look at this. Just so that we can see it on the video, I'm going to go ahead and change the alpha to 1 temporarily. On the paint node here, let's come over here and I'm going to select this line. And then using the point selection tool, I'm going to click on that and then I'll just go ahead and make sure that all the points are selected on that line. And I'm going to change the spacing of that back down to 0.2. I'm going to need to make this circle bigger, so just like I showed you before, I'll make sure all the points are selected. And using Shift and the arrow key, let's move it up on the y-axis here. And then I'm going to go down to the duplicate node. I'm going to change the angle of that back to 0. I'm going to add one more node to this, and that's going to be a transform node. I'm going to have a little bit more control over the rotation of this without, if I used it in the duplicate node, if I tried to change the angle, it would just, randomly, change it like that. But I don't want that. I want to keep these in line, okay? So that's where the transform node comes in. Just like before, for both of these nodes, I want to add some randomness. So if I come back over here and I look at this merge node, you can see that these lines are pretty much, all solid throughout here. But I'm going to take the same fast noise node and I'm going to hit paste. And I'm going to add it to this paint node as well. Only this time I'm going to increase the brightness a little bit. I still want some of the random opacity that comes with that, so I'm going to have that on those lines as well. And I'm also going to do the same with these solid lines. So I'm just going to copy and paste that fast noise, plug it into the mask again, and then that way you can see that it just helps the overall look. All right. And then under the background node up here, make sure we change our alpha back down to 0 just so that we can see all the work that we have done. All right, now that we have our lines, let's make the actual main eclipse that goes behind the Dune letters. So we're going to use a background node again, and I'm going to go over to image and uncheck auto resolution, change it once again to 2048 by 2048. And let's go over to color, and I'm going to change the red to 0.373, the green to 2.43, and the blue to 0.156. All right, and then let's take a look at it in our second viewport here. Just hit 2 on the keyboard. I'm going to make an ellipse mask. So right click, go to mask, go to ellipse, plug it into there. For this one, all we're going to do is change the soft edge to 0.22, 0.22, 0.022. The height and the width, we're going to switch that over to 0.29 and 0.29. Okay, so what this is going to do is give us that the sun behind the eclipsed planet. Okay, so in order to make that work, we're going to add in a glow node. So this time, just go right click, go to blur, and let's just do this glow node here. And we're going to plug this into here. And let's take a look at it. All right, now we're going to need to make this bright, and I'm going to blow it way out of proportion here, just so we can have that intense glow. So I'm going to change the size to 11, and the glow itself will be all the way to 1. And then the blend will be at 0.008. We're going to need to roughen up these edges here. So I'm going to add in a fast noise node. Plug that into there. And then for that, we're going to up the amount of detail. So let's hit 2 on the keyboard so we can see what our noise is going to look like. So the detail on this is going to be at 4.49. The contrast is going to stay at 1. The brightness, though, is going to be at negative 0.36. And then the scale, it will be at 13.07. And you'll see we get some nice breaking up along here. Just to go ahead and get some animation going, we can actually use the seethe and the seethe rate. So I'm going to go ahead and set the seethe to about 0.58, and the rate at which it's going to travel is at 0.22. Okay. So now let's make the planet that's going to cover this part. So we're going to take another background node, and we're also going to use a merge node to go ahead and merge these two. So since we want the glow in the background here, plug it into the yellow triangle, and this background we want it in the front, so we want it in the green triangle. And then inside this background node, let's change our image, uncheck auto resolution again, and do 2048 by 2048. And then let's take a look at it here. All right, and then we're going to take this ellipse node that we made for this original shape, and we're going to copy and paste it, and we're going to plug it in to the mask again. We're going to change the soft edge down to 0. If we click on the merge tool, we'll see that we do have our planet that is masking out that glow. Now this glow is still way too big, because in the title sequence it was very, very thin around the edge, and then when it moves down to the lower right, you see a little bit more of that. So what we're going to do is, first and foremost, we want to change the size of this to 0.346 by 0.346. We want to come over to this ellipse node, and we still want to see a little bit more than this. So what we're going to do is, inside of Fusion here, if you come over to these parameter boxes, if you click and hold the mouse button, you can actually drag this value. And what's really nice about this is that when you do it this way, it really scales up or scales down or changes the value in very fine increments. All right, so it gives you a little bit more control, especially if you saves time from having to type and stuff. So I'm going to do this at 305 by 305 for this example. To finish off this section here, you'll notice in the title sequence that they had a little bit of a red aberration that kind of wrapped around the planet instead of it just being cut off like this. So we're going to do the same thing by adding a tool. We'll go to blur and just go to glow. All right, and we'll plug that in there, and then I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard, and you can see now that is really wrapping around and just kind of gives it a little extra bit of detail. Of course, we can come over here and we can even reduce it down a little bit if we don't want too much. Okay, we can even set the color scale, so if we want it a little bit more red, like in that title sequence, we can add and bump up that red just a little bit more. With our Eclipse finished, let's go ahead and create the particle system and the background nebula, and then we'll finish out the rest of the title sequence with some animation. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a particle emitter. We need to make a particle renderer node. So we'll just have those two there. And then let's go ahead and adjust the variables in this P emitter. So under region, let's go ahead and set the size to 0.913. Under controls, let's change that number to 25.2. And then we have the lifespan is going to be 173 frames. Okay, that number refers to the actual number of frames of the animation. Okay, and then I'm going to vary it by 12.6 frames. Just so that we could see what we're doing here, I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard so that you can see what our emitter is actually doing here. So you'll notice that in Fusion, particles are actually all inside of the 3D scene, which is very handy. And that's one of the reasons why we need a P-render node. But we're going to also set up the other nodes to actually merge it into the scene. But let's finish out the emitter node here, and then I'll show you how to get it rendered out into the actual rest of the scene here. And then also link up our Eclipse and the lines that we created. So under the P emitter node, let's continue on. In this case, I'm going to make the velocity of 0.016. The variance will be 0.205. And then the angle variance will be 258.3. Okay, well, let's go into style. Now, in order to render these out, we don't want to have a point, we want to have a blob. And let's change the color of the blobs to red will be 0.364. The green will be 0.309. The blue will be 0.196. All right, that's going to give us that nice brown dusty color there. And then we're going to come down to the size controls here. And under size, I'm going to do 0.01. All right. I'll zoom in here so we can kind of see what these particles look like. All right. The size variance, we're also going to make that 0.01. And then the size over life, we're going to use this little graph down here. And I'm going to take this and just drag it down about halfway. If you click on the line, you'll actually create another point. So I'm going to raise that up a little bit, and then I'm going to click on the line again, bring that down. And you'll notice that each point has handles. And so working just like with a standard, graph, like a graph editor, you can take those and you can add in some weight, some ease in and ease out to this spline here. So I'm just add a little bit into this, maybe add a little bit there. All right, so as long as the line looks similar to this, all right, what we're gonna do is go into our P render node, and I'm gonna hit 2 on the keyboard so we can see what we're working with in here. And the only value I'm going to change is this global in and out. I actually want the animation of the emitter to start before the animation even begins at frame 1. So I'm going to type in -100 here, and you'll see that a lot more has emitted out of there, and that's because this is starting at -100 frames even before it reaches frame 0 here. Okay, so that's one way that you can get your particle simulation going beforehand. Now let's finish out the rest of the scene. We're going to need a couple more nodes. We're going to need to get a merge 3D node since this is a 3D scene. And then, because it's a 3D scene, we need to render that back out to a 2D format so that Fusion can combine it with the rest of the 2D stuff that we've been working on. So we'll use a renderer 3D node here. With our emitter set up, let's go ahead and merge these two scenes together. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to add in a merge node, and I'm going to merge the lines with the Eclipse. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to take this and I'm going to tie this into the background here, the lines, and then I'm going to place the Eclipse on top of those using the input there. And then I'm going to create another merge node, and this time I want the particles behind all of this stuff here. So I'm going to plug these into the background node here, and then I'm going to plug this into the foreground. All right, just so that we can see everything, because right now, if you look at the render 3D node, we have that transparent background. So temporarily, I'm going to make another merge node. I'm going to drag it out here because we're going to need to make one more particle system. And what I'm going to do is also make a background node. And I'm going to plug this into the background input, plug this into the foreground, and then that way, when I hit 1 on the keyboard, we can see that our particles are now displayed in our lines and our eclipse. Okay? Now, you'll notice too that our particles are showing up through that glow there. So we're going to add one more node, and it's very simple. All we're going to do is take this ellipse node that we have here, and I'm going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to tie it right into the renderer 3D. I'm also going to reduce or increase the size of this. All right, and you'll see that it's starting to mask out that area there. So we'll just make this even, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than the glow itself. All right, so we'll go to 402 on that. I'm also going to soften the edge a little bit, and I'm also going to increase the border width there. All right, and that's all that border width is going to do, is expand that mask out. And then of course, you know, you can blur the edges, which I'm just going to do just a little bit there. All right, with the first particle system done, let's go ahead and make the second particle system. So we're going to go ahead and select all the nodes here, and I'm just going to copy and paste. I'm going to move it up to give myself some room. I'm also going to delete this ellipse node here. And under the particle settings, what I want to do is under the P emitter node, let's go ahead and click on our Merge 3D. Let's look inside our viewport to actually see what this is doing. And I'm also going to hit 2 on the renderer node. All right, so under the P emitter node, though, we're going to make some changes to this. We're going to change the overall number now to 3.1. We're going to change the lifespan to 811 frames. All right, essentially what I'm going to be making with this particle system is the stars in the background. And then the positional variance, we're going to do 0.0031 under velocity, and we're going to change that to 0.047. The variance will be 0.197, and we'll keep the angle variance the same. And then if we come over to style, we're going to change the color of that to 0.380. The green will be 0.815, and the blue will be 0.862. All right, so that's going to give us some nice blue colors there. We're also going to give it some variance this time. So we're going to expand this, and on the red variance, we're going to change this and start to incorporate some red. On the blue variance, on the low side, we're going to do negative 0.075, and negative 0.75, not 0.075. And then we're going to do 0.425 on this. All right, and that's going to, you'll notice that our particles now have a variant in color. For the alpha variance, we're going to do negative 0.3 on the low side, and on the high side, we're going to do 0.7. All right, and so that's just going to, you know, make some of them a little bit more opaque than others. And we'll keep all the size controls exactly the same. What we're going to do is we are going to add in a fast noise node, and this will help, just like what we did with the lines, we're going to kind of mask out some of these here. And so we're going to add this as a mask. Under the fast noise node, we're going to set the detail to 4.41. We can actually look at this inside of our viewport here. The contrast is going to be 0.72. The brightness is going to be negative 0.11. And then the scale is going to be 6.61. Let's go ahead and merge this in here so that we can see what's going on. So I'm going to add in a merge node. All right, and just like before, we're going to take this and we're going to plug it in on the top. Take this node and plug it in behind, and then we'll plug it all back into here. All right, and then clicking on this node, I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard so that we can see everything. I'm going to go back to the P-render node because I can kind of see some of the stars, but what I need to do is change the global out. Since this is a slower moving particle system, I'm going to change that to negative 500. All right, and that's going to help bring that out a little bit more and fill up the scene a little bit better. After this render 3D node, we're going to add in a defocus node. All right, and this is going to just give us a nice blur on everything. So we're going to take the defocus here and holding down shift, let's drag that into there so we can link it together. And then under the defocus node, the filter, we're going to change it to Gaussian blur, and the size is going to be 2. The bloom is going to be 0.78, and the bloom threshold, we'll keep it at 0.75. All right, so all it does is it adds just a nice little blur to those particles. All right, and then the last step that we're going to do to finish out the background is we're going to make a nebula. All right, and for that, we'll copy this fast noise setting here, and we'll paste it. I'm going to create a merge node. All right, and we're going to tie that into there, but we're going to switch out the inputs here. So we're going to change that to be on top, this to be on the back. All right, and it's going to look a little crazy. With our fast noise node, we're going to change the first color of this to 0.016. And then for color number 2, we're going to change the red to 0.299. We're going to change the green to 0.173. And then the blue is going to be 0.15. And then the alpha, we're going to make that 0.205. Under the fast noise node here, we're going to go under image, and we'll click on auto resolution and change that to 2048 by 2048. Let's take our ellipse node that we made previously and copy, and we're going to paste it. And this time we're going to use it as a mask for the fast noise node. And just real quick, I'm going to take these nodes and move them over just to give us some room. And with this mask now, width of it's going to be 0.85, and then the height of it is going to be 0.268. All right, keep it rather small. I'm going to uncheck invert. For the soft edge, I'm going to increase it to 0.0992, and then the border width is going to be negative 0.025. And that's going to give us a nice clean little nebula in the background there. So with our background finished here, let's merge these two together. So the way we're going to do that is very simple. We're just going to take another merge node, and I'm going to drag it all the way over here, and I'm going to place the background on the background, and then this input to the foreground here, and then we'll just hit 1 on the keyboard. So now that you can see, we have both of these together. And then we're going to set up another merge node, And I'm also going to create another background node. And I'm going to tie that into the background there, this into the foreground, and then I'll hit 2 on the keyboard. And this is going to be important later for when we go to animate. With everything finished, let's go ahead and get started with the last part of this tutorial, which is animating it. So the first thing that we're going to do is that I've noticed the lines are sticking in front of this glow. If we go back to the merge node that merged this line group here and this Eclipse, I'll notice that the inputs are different here. They're not correct. So let's just swap these two, and that will get our lines positioned correctly this time. All right, and then let's go over and do this animation. Now, if we look at the title sequence, we'll notice that all it is that the letters, they rotate into position. This dust kind of goes back into the letters. Not all the way, but it makes progress going towards that. The overall circular lines here, especially the dotted line ones, they do the little line tracing, so they animate rotating around and shrinking along that diameter there. The whole image itself scales back and fades to black, and then the eclipse behind here, the sun behind there goes from being in center here to the bottom right. And then lastly, this fades into view. So let's run through that on how we can do that inside of Fusion. So if we go all the way back to where we created original text, let's go to the Text 3D tool. Let's make sure that we are on frame 0 and go to Transform, go to Rotation, and we're going to rotate the Y axis. All right, and we're just going to rotate the Y on a positive value. And for this case, it doesn't have to be any specific value, just it could be whatever you want. The whole point is that at the end, it just needs to be shown flat to the screen. Okay, so I'm just going to give it a random value, 65.2, and I'm going to hit the diamond to make a keyframe. And then I'm going to go over to frame 140, and I'm just going to type that into 0. All right, and it will automatically create a keyframe for us. And then I'm going to hit the back tool here, so it goes back to frame 0. I'll go to the U letter now on this node. Go to the transform, same thing, rotation on the Y. We'll just give it a random value. We'll make sure we create the keyframe. This time I'm going to have it go and stop maybe 15 frames after the D is finished. And I'm just going to go to 0. And it'll automatically create that keyframe. Go back to frame 0. Click on the next node. Go to N, rotation. And we're going to rotate that as well. Create the keyframe. And let's go to frame about 165 and go to 0 on that. Let's go back to the very beginning again. Let's go to the E, transform. Now remember, this was the D that we had originally rotated 180 degrees. All right, so we need to remember to go back to that value. So let's go ahead and rotate this. And in the title sequence, it was almost at 90 degrees parallel to the screen here, or perpendicular to the screen. So let's make that about 253. All right, and I'm going to hit the keyframe on frame 0 there, and I'm going to go to frame 175, and we'll change that back to 180. So let's move the dust back into the letters. And remember, we did that using the duplicate 3D node. All right, so let's make sure that we are in frame 0. And really all it is remember, we use the translate and offs and the rotate, the translation and the rotation values to create all this here. All right, So all we're going to do is at frame 0, we're on the D, okay, under this duplicate 3D node. We're going to keyframe both of these values here, and then all the way over to the very, very last frame of the animation, we'll just do 0, 0, 0, 0. All right. And then let's go back to the very beginning of the animation. Let's go down to the second duplicate node for the U and keyframe these values. Go to the last frame of the animation and do the same thing, 0, 0, 0, 0. All right. Go to the next one. Make sure we go all the way back to the beginning animation here. Keyframe the values. Last frame. Type in 0, 0, 0, 0. All right. And then the last duplicate 3D node for the E. Make sure we're at the first frame of the animation here. Keyframe it. Go to the last frame. And go to 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay. Now remember, we do have those vortex distortion nodes on there, so that's why you're kind of getting some of that waviness from the duplicate, but I kind of like the style, so we'll go ahead and keep it like that. Okay, now that we have the dust animated, let's have this eclipse animated over here in our E. So it's actually very simple. We're going to go to the ellipse node, this mask that we originally created for the blue, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here. Let's go to the first frame of our animation, and I'm going to advance it a little, probably about 40 seconds in or 40 frames in, okay? And I'm going to go to level on the ellipse node here, and I'm just going to reduce this down to 0, okay? And I'm going to create a keyframe, all right? And then I'm going to go forward about 1 second. This is about 24 frames per second. So I'm going to go just a little bit more than that to probably about frame 80 here. And I'm going to just increase the level back all the way up. Okay? Let's go and let's animate these lines here. Okay, specifically the dotted lines. All right. So if you remember, that's in our node layout here. Okay. And the way that we're going to do that, let's go into our paint tool. And let's go ahead and select everything there. And if you remember, Fusion has it to where we have this write-on node. All right. And we can write those lines on and off. Okay. So let's start down here. Okay. And at frame 0, let's keyframe it. And let's go to frame 120. And let's just write those back on. All right. And then also on the duplicate node, remember we adjusted the angle on that. So I'm also going to go to frame 0 on that. And I'm going to take this angle here, and I actually want to rotate it back. And I'm going to keyframe it, go over to our frame 120, and we're going to rotate it back around. All right, and that will just add some movement on to those circles there. Now for the main eclipse, we want to move the sun behind the planet to the lower right. So if we go to our ellipse node down here, where we created this original sun, what we're going to do is just click on the center, make sure you're on frame 0, and we're going to do a couple different values here. Okay, one is that we're going to do the center for the X and the Y, and we're also going to adjust the width and the height. And there's a reason why, because we still want it to be relatively thin even when it comes over this way. So at frame 0, go ahead and keyframe those, and then let's go over to frame 150, and all we're going to do is move it down and to the right. We are also going to reduce the size of this because we don't want it too big. Okay, that looks about right. Okay, now let's get ready for the last part of our animation, and that's going to be fading out the background and scaling it down at the same time. Okay, so we're going to have to do two things in order to do that. So the first thing is that if you come over to your layout, and you'll see that this node network handles all of our background, from the ellipse to the lines and the particle system, everything. Okay, so if we go back to frame 0, all right, what we're going to do is, in between these two merge nodes, I'm going to click on this merge node here, and I'm going to add in a transform. Okay, and I'm going to place that right in the middle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the size. So I'm going to go ahead and keyframe that, and I'm going to go over to frame, let's just make it frame 90. And what we're going to do is scale this back. All right. Okay. Now you'll notice that it's going to get to those edges there. So what we're going to do is, since we're at frame 90, when that really starts to disappear, we're going to now fade it away. And the way that we're going to do that is we are going to go over to this merge node here. Okay, and you'll remember we created this background, all right, and it's going to be that black background. So what we can do in this merge node here is that we can go over to frame 90, and we're going to take the blend and just drag it down to 0. All right, and that will handle taking care of our background disappearing for us. All right, so if we remember, I actually need to keyframe that, so make a keyframe at frame 0 there, and then let's go over to frame 90, and we'll then change that blend down to 0. All right, and then the rest of the animation will play out. All right, well, that about wraps up this tutorial, guys. I want to say thank you for tuning in, and also thank you for sticking around too. I know I have not posted in a year. Life's been crazy like that, but I hope to post some more. If you have any ideas about anything else that you would like to learn in Fusion, any other motion graphic ideas, you know, stuff that's not typically done with Fusion, especially in, you know, the animation and motion graphics field, please post in the comments below any ideas or struggles that you have with the program, and I'll see what I can do to either make tutorials or answer your questions. And with that in mind, if you'd like to see more, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next tutorial.